year is 2008 and the gaming world is gradually shifting. Just as the turn of the millennium saw the near extinction of the adventure games, the end of the new millennium's first decade saw the decline of real-time strategy games, a genre that many of us grew up on. While it's largely considered a forgotten genre today, 15 years ago, some major names still emerged. One such title was the continuation of the iconic Command & Conquer series, specifically Red Alert 3. And it was certainly nothing to be ashamed of, boasting an average review score about 80%. Unfortunately, this marked the end of an era. Such Command & Conquer 3 disappointed, and we have been waiting in a vain for a proper sequel ever since, despite promising signs for a continuation of the general sub-series. The story picks up where the previous installments left off, presenting an alternate history following World War II, where the Cold War between the Allies and the Soviets erupts into open conflict. After failing to conquer the west part of the world, the Soviet Union decides to try its luck a third time. However, a completely new enemy appears on the scene, definitely mixing things up. A third party, Imperial Japan, enters the fray, and the plot becomes even more complex. Friends become enemies and enemies become friends, at least temporarily. The plot is rife with intrigue. You may have to eliminate a high-ranking commander to follow a president's order, only to find out the president isn't the ally he appears to be all along. Similarly, the Soviets and the Allies are forced to unite against a greater threat. You even end up killing your own president just to maintain an alliance with the Soviets, who, true to form, still end up betraying you in the end. From the narrative perspective, Red Alert 3 is fantastic and surpasses its predecessors. However, for me, the significant flaw is the increasingly sparse use of cinematic cutscenes and accompanying animations. These have always been the spice of the Command & Conquer series. Here, it's often limited to a short pre-mission briefing and then it's straight into the action. This is a real shame, considering the effort put into the plot and the fact that they once again brought in famous actors for the cutscenes, with the most recognizable probably being Tim Curry, whom I fondly remember from Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. The missions are varied this time. It's no longer just about destroying every last unit and building, or worse, finding that forgotten wall you must destroy before the mission ends. You often have various sabotage objectives, and these goals frequently change during the game. For example, you may start on a small map and have to free someone or eliminate a target. Once complete, your mobile construction vehicle arrives, the map expands, and the classic build and destroy phase begins. One mission I found particularly fun requires you to prevent zeppelins, which occasionally emerge from football stadiums and other buildings, from leaving the map, otherwise it's game over. In another, you have to storm Easter Islands, where the enemy has upgraded the famous statues by giving them cannons. True, eliminating this cultural heritage feels somewhat morally questionable. So let's look into the units, and the units imbalance is a bit problematic. The game seems to recommend playing the campaigns in the order of Soviets, Allies and Imperials, and I have to agree with this progression. The first Soviet campaign is relatively simple. Aside from one mission where you face both the Allies and the rogue Soviet general, it's mostly a walk in the park. You have access to the powerful and versatile Mammoth tanks, long-range missile ships and zeppelins or helicopters that never need reloading, covering you from both air and water. Then come the Allies and things starts to get taller. While the ground units aren't exclusive, they have air units and bombers that can wipe out an enemy base in moments. However, the final mission, where you have 30 minutes to destroy 7 iron curtains, and a monastery converted into a missile base, all while under constant attack is challenging, even on medium difficulty. On the hardest setting, you only have 20 minutes, which is a significant and genuinely big problem. Finally, the new faction, Imperial Japan, entered the scene. The Japanese focus on high-tech robotics but aren't particularly excellent at anything. They have great robots that can only destroy ground targets and can't cross water. They also have powerful laser tanks, but if any enemy gets close, they are forced to retreat, which is difficult given how slow they are. I must admit that their navy is fantastic. Their ultimate ships are the best of all the factions, but they have one major drawback. They essentially lack air units, apart from basic soldiers who can fly. This is where the game has a bit of an issue. In most previous titles, time limits were either non-existing or barely noticeable. Here, they are sometimes already harsh. For example, in one Japanese mission, you first have to use a sort of voodoo doll unit, which is, by the way, excellent because it lifts enemy units into the air, disabling their attacks before destroying them to prevent a massive attack on an abandoned base. Once defended, you have just 15 minutes to destroy 4 allied towers that can take control of your units, all while the Soviets join the fray. With no air units, you are forced to rely on your navy and weak tank ships on the land. Ultimately, my tactics of rushing the enemy base with the Psycho Doll before the Soviets appeared, even while defending my own base, allowed me to break through. When the Soviets arrived, they were quickly disseminated and the mission was over almost instantly. However, without this unconventional tactic, I have no idea how one would complete the mission, as breaking through the enemy base to face these powerful mammoth tanks without air support is nearly impossible. I do recall one relaxing mission, though, where the third part was protecting your convoy. If you succeeded, the Shogun Executioners appears, 3 huge, interconnected robots. While somewhat clumsy, it's essentially invincible if you don't mess up badly. It's a walking fortress that obliterates everything, including buildings and mammoth tanks, in just 1 or 2 attacks. Luckily, you never face this Shogun in the campaign. The game is generous, though, as you earn experience points during each mission, which can be exchanged for bonuses. Each faction has 3 categories of bonuses that you progressively upgrade. The upgrades become available as the game progresses and include options like a weaker airstrike, which gets stronger with upgrades, temporary fog of war removal, temporary strength increase for designated units, gaining money by eliminating specific units, or dropping paratroopers anywhere on the visible map. I consider this a bit of a cheat against the enemy, but I enjoyed using it and I have no shame in it. For me though, it's a big shame that these bonuses don't carry over into a subsequent missions. You always have to start fresh. On the other hand, this allows you to adjust your strategy for each specific mission. The super weapons also deserve a mention. I never pay much attention to them in previous games. I remember in the first Red Alert, you could build a nuclear silo and launch a nuclear bomb after a while, and I always look forward to it, only for the super weapons to barely destroy a single barracks. In Red Alert 2, they caused some significant damage, but it was almost always recoverable. However now, if the Soviets use their vacuum imploder, for example, you are simply finished. Seriously, with a bit of luck, your main building survives, it resists the attack, but half of your base is gone. The other factions have similarly devastating weapons, so once a super weapon appears, it must become your primary target. A surprise also awaits you with the construction of buildings. Barracks, power plants, factories and docks are the same, but as mentioned, each faction has very distinct units. The construction methods also differ. For the Soviets, you order a building, the money is deducted, and the construction immediately starts growing on the side. Personally, I don't like this method. You can't pre-build a structure, and anyone can destroy it while it has been constructed. The Allies use the classic method. You click on a building, and it's prepared gradually. Once ready, it's instantly placed on the map. This allows you to pre-build the defensive towers. For example, if you plan to capture an enemy base, the Japanese have the strangest method. When you order to create a building, the payment is processed almost instantly and a small vehicle rolls out. You drive this vehicle to the desired location where you deployed it, and at the moment the building starts constructing. It's a variation of the Soviet method, just more complicated. Well, it is the last campaign, so they don't want to make it too easy for you. Finally, I would like to mention two more things. The first thing is mostly cosmetic and concerns resource harvesting. In all previous Red Alert games, you had to slowly mine iron ore deposits. This time it's different. There are almost always two refinery sites immediately next to your base. The harvester drives in, you wait a short while, and the ore is harvested. However, the amount of resources in the deposits is very limited, forcing you to act quickly and cautiously. You can capture neutral refineries for a constant stream of income, and sometimes a deposit is available on the base, though it's often occupied by the enemy or worse, your ally. And this brings us to the second new feature, allies. The great news is that you are almost never alone in completing missions. A general always builds a base next to yours to help you defeat the enemy. To keep things fair, you essentially face more than one enemy as well. However, this is not a complete win. Firstly, the ally occupies resource deposits and refineries. The loss of refineries in particular hurts because what they capture you can no longer claim. Furthermore, their intelligence is questionable. Sometimes they genuinely help, but in the later stage, it's hard enough to keep yourself alive, let alone them. And one more irritating thing, you often try to play for time because destroying an enemy base can trigger the appearance a new, larger one with more brutal attacks, and you want to prepare for that. However, as soon as the enemy is weakened, your ally eagerly rushes in to finish them off. While the game gives you an option to coordinate with them to some extent, I personally wasn't very successful at it. The game's graphical style is consistent with what we know from the previous parts of the game, while the main series is dark and gloomy. Red Alert has always been colorful, making it look a bit like a fairy tale instead of the greatest bloody conflict in human history. This game holds true to the tradition, although the graphics have certainly advanced. Missions often take place in locations where one would rather take a vacation. Everything is colorful, but it's not as exaggerated as in Red Alert 2. What I appreciate most, however, is the perfect clarity typical of 2D strategies. No camera rotation and a correct viewing angle of the battlefield are essential for truly enjoying the game without constantly worrying about where you are looking or where you need to go. Plague of modern real-time strategies. The music needs a little introduction as the energetic rock soundtrack was present in the previous games and returns once again. And what are the pros? Well, at the first place, clarity and graphics. Then there is a new faction, specifically Imperial Japan. There is a unit variety and distinct gameplay styles for each faction, and many innovative elements. And what are the cons? There are few accompanying video sequences and cutscenes, some time-limited missions, and the units of the factions are imbalanced. And that is all for today, and I promise you that it will be shorter next time. So bye and see you next time!